Hello, welcome to Moon Musings. This is going to be an energy report for the full moon in Aquarius that is occurring on Monday, August 19th, 2024. So, this full moon is very intense. There's a lot of challenging energy, a lot of different planets are involved in tense aspects, and yeah, it's gonna be one of those full moons that just feels where everyone is saying, what's going on in the astrology today? I feel horrible. I try to not like fear monger around transits, but this full moon does look really challenging. I want to first just do a quick overview of what a full moon in Aquarius in general what means for us, what those invitations are. And I'll have some journal prompts to work through. And then we'll get into first, like how we can move through tension. If we're starting to feel tension, if there's conflict, if it just feels overwhelming, some of what I'm seeing in the chart for the full moon where we can find some relief. And then for the astro nerds, I will get into all of the nitty-gritty details of what exactly is making this full moon intense and the different energies at play and how we can just understand them more deeply and what we're being asked to do or asked to not do. Alrighty. So, full moons, they're always an opportunity to acknowledge the completion of something. It is a time where the moon is as big as it can be, right? It's a full moon. And starting immediately after the full moon, it's starting to get small again. So we are acknowledging the fullness of something. And at that same moment that we're acknowledging that this is done, this has been completed, we also start to let go of it. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can be like I've completed this big project that I've been working towards for months, and now I'm letting go of it, taking up so much of my time and energy because I've completed it. And that's a really positive way that it can show up. And it can also be like acknowledging a bad habit or something in my life that is not serving me anymore, and I'm choosing consciously to let go of it with the full moon and allowing that waning moon to remove it from my life. So it can also sometimes be a hard thing that we're letting go of. It's not always easy, right, to break a habit or to end a relationship that we know isn't healthy. There can be some grief in letting go, even when we know it's the right thing to do. So that's like a full moon, right? And then the full moon in Aquarius. Aquarius is our fixed air sign. Aquarius has a very zoomed out perspective on life, on the world, and it's kind of idealistic, not really like in a romantic way, but more so in an intellectual way. It always brings to mind when I was in college, I studied both economics and psychology, and people would ask me like, why are you studying both of those? And I would always say psychology studies why people are not rational, and economics studies how people would behave if they were rational. And of course, economics is not super accurate in predicting human behavior because people are not rational. And I think Aquarius energy can often be very much like economics, and like this is how things should be in an ideal world. If everyone was making the right decisions, like this is the obvious solution. And so it can be a little disconnected from the realities of being a human with emotions and stuff like that. It just has this very clear vision of how things could be. So that's where the like idealism comes into play, but it's not from disconnection with reality. It's more from, I would say, like disconnection with humans or the messiness of emotions, maybe. When we think about the symbol of Aquarius, it's the water bearer. So it's this person holding a vessel of water, and water represents emotions in astrology, right? And the water is contained and it is being controlled. In some cases, it's like in some images we see it's being poured out, but it's never overwhelming the water bearer, compartmentalized and managed, which is definitely how some people are able to handle their emotions, but that's not the general rule for how humans interact with their emotions. So the full moon in Aquarius is on this Leo Aquarius axis, right? They're opposite signs. The sun's in Leo. It's inviting us into authenticity and showing up as ourselves, being brave enough to show up as ourselves. And then Aquarius, also very much true to itself, but without really the concern for what other people think as much. And more so like showing up as yourself, and there's an inherent not caring what people think. Whereas the Leo energy we want to be ourselves and we want to be celebrated for being ourselves. And then Aquarius can often like distance themselves from people through this almost protection from rejection thing. Like if I'm far away from you, you can't reject me. And then also just feeling very different and having this experience of feeling like you don't fit in or like you're very different from other people, which is usually not true. I mean, everybody is different from each other. We're all unique. But I think Aquarius oftentimes can convince us that we are too different to be part of the group. So our first journal prompt will be, how do I distance myself from others? And how can I let go of those patterns? And then is there like a layer of ego associated with being seen as different or being seen as an outsider? Society simultaneously funnels us to be kind of homogenized, right? Like these are the ideals that we should all be working towards. But then at the same time, there is shame around working towards those ideals. Like you can't win. There's like pressure in both ways, like to be the same and to be different. And I think a lot of times when we are in that Aquarius energy, there is resistance to being part of the group because we don't want to be seen as like that homogenized group of people that are all working towards the same things. So, is there a layer of ego associated with being different or being an outsider? And how can I find some common ground with my community? Because really, the highest quality of Aquarius is being an integral part of the community. And Aquarius is able to see the future for the community and be a guide and maybe not really a leader, but helping steer towards that vision of the future that they are able to hold. But in order to guide the group, Aquarius needs to learn how to be part of the group and know that being part of the group doesn't sacrifice your individuality or your uniqueness. And then kind of going back to that idealization and that vision for the future that can be out of touch, maybe. So how do I over rationalize or over idealize my life or life in general? Do my dreams and ideals for the future still align with who I am? And what in my life is not serving my dreams and my vision for the future? So those are the journal prompts for the full moon that I have. All right. Now, let's get into some of the sticky energy, sticky change. So there's a lot of tension, as I mentioned at the beginning. Some of our heaviest hitters are in challenging aspects, which is never fun. There are opportunities for release and to find some ease or find some grounding or just a touch point to bring yourself back in if the energy feels overwhelming. And we're going to be looking for something that feels really important, something that's really true to us as kind of our anchor to really hold us down. If you imagine you're in a river that's moving really quickly and you have an actual physical anchor that's holding you in place in the bottom of this You can breathe underwater in this image, okay? An anchor that's holding you in the same place in the river, even though everything is like moving really rapidly around you and there's fish going around you and everything else is moving, but you are staying in the same place, and maybe like the rocks right underneath you are staying in the same place. And instead of trying to figure out how to get out of the river or to move upstream or downstream, you're just focused on holding onto this anchor and like staying still until it slows down. And we want to draw upon our deep inner knowing of ourselves. I think a lot of quiet time and a lot of meditation, maybe journaling, to really tap into that deepest version of ourselves, the most inner person that you are, and then kind of allowing that self-knowledge to remind you of what is really important to you. What is your primary like direction right now? If you had to only pick one thing that is most important to you, what is that? And that's what we're going to be holding on to. What is something that you're really passionate about that's really aligned with who you are? And it can be really simple. It could be like being a really good parent, or it could be being connected to nature, or something more complicated. Maybe you have your true calling as your career, and that's what you want to be focusing on. And then we're going to slap on some blinders and not necessarily ignore everything that's going on, but we're going to try not to give it too much of our energy, because it's a very chaotic and uncomfortable energy, and change is going to happen whether or not we are actively participating in it. So resisting the urge to try to control everything that's going on. And we're not trying to keep all of the rocks on the river floor in the same place. We are very focused on this one thing because some of the stuff around us is going to shift and change. And so we just want to really focus on that deepest level of safety and like staying connected to that. And if the logistics or the communication or the tech or whatever it is not really working out, we're going to try not to let that freak us out too much and just stay focused on that anchor. All right. I hope that was a clear image. Okay. And then now let's get into why this full moon is so intense. So the full moon is happening the day after the Mercury cazimi. So Mercury is currently retrograde, and the cazimi is the day that Mercury crosses the sun. So on Sunday, the day before the full moon, the sun and Mercury will be conjunct. And then on Monday, Mercury will be just like 1 degree before the sun. So it's still close enough to be a conjunction. Now, the Mercury cazimi is kind of like the peak of the retrograde phase. So we're in a Mercury retrograde for most of the month of August. The retrograde invitations, the Cliff Notes version, we are being invited to make changes, to become aware of changes that we need in our lives, specifically in this Virgo and Leo areas of our life. And that's going to be around perfectionism, around needing to be in control all the time, our physical environment being like clean and organized, and around health and how we interact with our bodies, and then also around showing up authentically, like being brave enough to be seen as the truest version of ourselves, and our creative process. I've been hearing from a few people that are in a creative slump, especially after the retrograde re-entered Leo, because that's where that creative part lives. And I think that likely is not going to start to ease up until after the full moon. So the retrograde, we're being invited to make changes and kind of reorganize how we think about these areas of life. And during the retrograde, we're really just becoming aware of what needs change. We're not really able to identify solutions all the time until the retrograde is over. And that can be kind of challenging, especially we have Venus in Virgo, which loves to fix things, loves to find the solution and improve it. And so it would feel so good to find a solution, but it just might not be available yet, especially with all of this tension that's been building and will continue to build until the full moon. So we have that Mercury retrograde conjunct the sun. So that means it's also opposite the moon because the full moon is opposite the sun. And so that can also bring a layer of communication is hard. Words are hard. It's hard to express yourself and be understood. Maybe we say something and the words that come out of our mouth are not actually what we wanted our message to be. So I would say it's not a good energy for having a difficult conversation or resolving a conflict because likely there's going to be misunderstandings. Yeah, so other than that Mercury retrograde, we have two T squares. So you may have heard me talk about squares before. Squares are a tense aspect where the planets are 90 degrees apart. So it makes like a 90-degree angle, which is a square angle, right? So there's one opposition and two squares in a T square. And that is even more tense than a regular square, which makes sense if we think about it. If two planets in this tense aspect is challenging, then just adding another in the same tense aspect is not going to make it really any easier. And we have two of these happening right now. Like in this case, we have the sun and Mercury are square Uranus. And then since the sun is opposite the moon is also square Uranus. So the one I just mentioned involving the sun and the moon and Mercury and then Uranus, this is in the fixed signs. So Aquarius and Leo are the fixed fire and air signs. And then Uranus is in Taurus. And so that's the fixed earth sign. So fixed signs already don't really like change and they can be a little stubborn, especially if change is happening to them and there's not a feeling of control over the change that's happening. It can be really challenging and they can be very prone to frustration. So I think that is just going to feel like very stuck. But then Uranus, which is the planet of change, is ruling the moon. And so I think it's like something needs to change and I can't make change, but then maybe a change happens to me. And at this moment of the full moon, I cannot see how this change could possibly be a good thing, how it could possibly relieve the tension that I'm experiencing. It seems like it's only making things worse. Now, hopefully, as we move on from the full moon, we start to gain some clarity and that looking back on it and what has unfolded from whatever tension came up, hopefully we're able to see a way that that was productive and moving us forward in some way. But in the moment, I think it's just going to feel like, is this happening? Like, this is not a change I would have chosen for myself. I would rather not go through this right now, whatever. And then our other T square, so we have two of them. Our other T square is in the mutable signs. So this is a little bit less tense because the mutable signs are more open to change. They're a little bit more flexible inherently. So even though they do have these opposing viewpoints and the way that they would go about something is very different, they are more flexible in those and able to give a little to find solutions. So we have in the mutable T square, we have Venus in Virgo, which is opposite Saturn in Pisces. And then both of those are being squared by Mars and Jupiter, who are conjunct in Gemini. So we have Venus in Virgo, which I kind of mentioned earlier when I was talking about the Mercury retrograde. Venus in Virgo really likes to find a solution and to improve things and make things more beautiful. And also, Venus in Virgo loves to be in control and to be in charge. But when opposite Saturn in Pisces, Saturn is like I don't know, I almost said like the trump card in astrology, but I don't think that's necessarily always true. But definitely when inner planets are involved, totally does feel like that, especially with Venus. Venus on its own is mature and loving and that graceful, easeful energy that we associate with Venus. But once Saturn comes in with a challenging aspect, it turns Venus into this like petulant child energy because Saturn is authority and restriction. And so it's like coming in and saying no. And then Venus is kind of pouting about it. And then the Saturn in Pisces invitation, it's learning how to not be in control, learning how to surrender and trust, and also to honor boundaries for ourselves that are not required by time or space. It's like not needing to have a reason to say no to something, like the vibes are wrong is a sufficient reason to say no. I've also seen a lot of people stop drinking what with Saturn in Pisces, which makes a lot of sense because lower expression of Pisces is escapism and needing to numb and to feel less. Pisces is just so sensitive. So needing to feel less a lot of times when Pisces energy is not expressed in a healthy way, there can be turning to substances to numb. And Saturn comes in and set some boundaries on that. And there's so many people that are choosing to stop drinking, choosing just like different ways of taking care of themselves to honor their like energetic bodies. We have this Saturn in Pisces that is like you don't need to be in control all the time. And then we have this Venus in Virgo who really wants to be in control. She's like, give me something to fix. So that's tense already. And then we have Jupiter and Mars in Gemini, which I think, like, overall can be a really fun thing. This is a longer conjunction. It's been going on throughout the month. And I think it's been nice to have that with the Mercury retrograde because it encourages us to stay flexible, to not take things too seriously, and to be creative and open to new ideas. Gemini is very non-judgmental, and so it's willing to try something that might seem like a bad idea, which can be really helpful during a Mercury retrograde when the idea that we thought was a good idea suddenly needs to change. And having that access to being more open-minded and being more flexible can really help us find solutions. However, in this tense aspect, it's going to just be chaos because Gemini can be so chaotic, and then having Mars there and Jupiter there is just like expanding it. I think it's going to be internet fights and knit verbal battles because Mars is the Roman god of war. It's charging into battle. And so when we put that into the context of all of this tension, I think that it's going to be people are snippy with each other and maybe there's like pranking someone and it doesn't go over well and they actually get really mad or something like that. This full moon is just not the moment for this silly, out of control energy because we have this tense aspect with this Venus that's like, I want to be in control and fix things. And then this Gemini energy is maybe making fun of that desire within us. It could be we're trying to fix something and other people aren't taking it seriously. It's a very interesting combination. And so we have those two big T squares where there's just like different flavors of tension, right? But with a T square, we've got 3 out of the 4 signs for each modality represented. So with the fixed T square, the 3 fixed signs represented are Leo, Aquarius, and Taurus. So then the missing fixed sign is Scorpio. So to relieve the tension of that fixed T square, we want to lean into Scorpio energy within ourselves. It would be super helpful to identify this in your natal chart, find out where Scorpio is and what that area of life is, and just kind of live in that area of life. And then the mutable T square, we have Virgo and Pisces, and then we have Gemini. So the missing mutable sign is Sagittarius. And Sagittarius and Scorpio are right next to each other. So it could be that Scorpio and Sag in the same house in your natal chart, and that'll make it really easy to identify what area of life is being focused on. That's where what I was talking about, that anchoring in and finding what is most important to us, that's where that came from. Because both Scorpio and Sagittarius are very like aware of the self. Scorpio is like all about diving deep within the self and getting to know the self and knowing what is most important to me, what makes me powerful, what am I really good at, where does my power come from? And then Sagittarius takes that knowledge and power and it points it in a direction that we are most interested in, that is most aligned for us. And that's that focused, passionate pursuit of a goal. That's why Sagittarius is often associated with higher education, because we are like so dedicated to that subject or that topic that we learn as much as we can about it. And so tapping into that very grounded, self aware space can allow all of the other chaos to go on around us and still feel in touch with ourselves. We really don't want to be using escapism during the full moon because we have that Saturn in Pisces, and wherever Saturn is, there are challenging consequences for expressing that energy in a less than ideal way. And so we really don't want to be going up and out. We want to be grounding down and staying in our bodies and taking really good care of ourselves. And in order to do that, I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of block out what's going on. So, yeah, this was probably the hardest moon musings that I've done. I was like really trying to find the positive in it. And then I just realized that that was not true. I want it to be as authentic as the Leo season invitation asks me to be. And I think it is a really challenging new moon. So I hope that we are able to take good care of ourselves and remember that it's a temporary transit and we will all be okay in the end. So happy full moon, and let me know how this feels for you, and yeah, any other comments that you have. Thanks.